As the terrible destruction of the War of the Beast faded into history, the Imperium entered a new era, remembered as the Forging. This period is considered by many later scholars to represent the golden age of the Imperium in the time after the Horus Heresy. The Imperium began to expand again into unexplored regions of the galaxy for the first time in centuries. Just as in the days of the Great Crusade, Imperial forces drove back the Xenos and Chaos threats and reclaimed whole regions of the galaxy for mankind. Internal stability and communications were strengthened, as astropathic choirs were established on countless worlds. Even technological advancements were still made, after the Adeptus Mechanicus recovered a valuable new standard template construct database dating back to the dark age of technology from the ruins of the Canis system. With the full backing of every division of the Adeptus Terra, the state church of the Adeptus Ministorum, or Ecclesiarchy, continued to expand its reach and influence over the citizens of the Imperium. As Imperial territory grew during the Forging, the Ecclesiarchy also saw vast new wealth flow into its coffers, and it moved to expand its own organization. The galaxy was divided up into territories called dioceses, each of which was led by an official known as a cardinal. Together, the cardinals governed the entirety of the Ecclesiarchy through a council called the Holy Synod, which was located on Terra. The Synod elected one of its own members as the head of the church, the Ecclesiarch. But the Ministorum's power grew so rapidly in this period that much of its manpower was simply devoted to the logistics of administering such a vast organization. More secular officials known as archdeacons and deacons were responsible for coordinating the construction of new shrines and temples to the god emperor. They established the rules for collecting tithes from the faithful and how this wealth would be distributed among the dioceses. By the end of the 33rd millennium, the results of these efforts had become apparent. Except in territories controlled by the Mechanicus or the Adeptus Astartes, every imperial world now had a cathedral dedicated to the god emperor. Thousands of shrines dotted every human planet, and the wealth of an entire galaxy flowed into the Ecclesiarchy's coffers. But as the Ecclesiarchy's wealth and political control over the imperial populace grew, so did the ambitions of its clergy. It had begun as a humble religious order that sought to teach others to emulate the emperor's self-sacrifice for the betterment of mankind. But the Ecclesiarchy of this period was far more concerned about secular matters. Its leaders were determined to maintain a stranglehold over the Imperium's politics and economy. From its inception, the Ecclesiarchy had sought to expand its influence into every nook and cranny of the Imperium and the wider galaxy. It labeled all who opposed its teachings as heretics and condemned many to death. This desire to maximize the state church's influence was opposed by many of the High Lords of Terra. The High Lords could slow the Ecclesiarchy's expansion into new systems by vetoing the large-scale military offensives known as Imperial Crusades. A crusade could only be ordered by the authority of a majority of the High Lords, since it required the participation of all the different arms of the Imperial military, as well as the bureaucrats of the Adeptus Terra. But as faith in the god emperor became universal, it also became increasingly difficult for even the High Lords to deny the will of the clergy. After all, the Holy Synod claimed to represent the divine will of humanity's deity, and many of the High Lords were also true believers. It was not long before the Ecclesiarchy was indirectly dictating imperial law, and had established its own private military force, the Fraterus Templar. The Fraterus Templar had been established in the 32nd millennium, sometime before the War of the Beast, and had grown out of the corps of guards who had once protected the ecclesiarchal palace on Terra. As the Ministorum expanded, so did the Fraterus Templar, which became a professional military force similar in ability and equipment to the Imperial Guard, while also possessing its own transports and capital ships. With this force at their disposal, the Ecclesiarch could call for what was known as a war of faith. A war of faith was a conflict that concerned only the direct clergy of the Ministorum, and those of the church's laity willing to follow them into war. But its most important purpose was to stir up popular support among the Imperium's faithful masses. This was because an imperial crusade was usually also declared a war of faith by the Ecclesiarch. When this happened, the Ecclesiarch would announce the objectives of the war and denounce its target as godless heretics deserving the emperor's vengeance. Before the establishment of the Frateres Templar, the Ministorum had been forced to wait for the High Lords to approve an imperial crusade so that the imperial military could achieve its goals. But with their own private army and stellar navy, the Ecclesiarchy could now pursue its own military goals, whether the High Lords agreed to declare them an imperial crusade or not. This loss of true authority did not go unnoticed by some of the High Lords. In the private sessions of the Senatorum Imperialis, the Fabricator General of the Adeptus Mechanicus most often opposed the will of the Ecclesiarchy, and the chapter masters of the Adeptus Astartes also increasingly viewed their orders as tainted by the desires of the state church. Angered by their own loss of power and status, the adepts of the Administratum also sought to re-establish themselves as the primary source of authority in the Imperium. The Administratum re-established its authority in several ways, including influence votes in the Senatorum and undermining the authority of the Ecclesiarch by appointing its own loyalists to powerful offices. From the late 34th to the early 35th millennium, the power of the Ecclesiarchy finally diminished, especially after a series of disastrously weak and incompetent ecclesiarchs was elected. To the populace at large, the Ministorum remained as powerful and all-knowing as ever. But behind the scenes, the Administratum had turned the tables and was now dictating the agenda of the Holy Synod. To escape the suffocating influence of the Administratum, the Ecclesiarch Benedin IV moved the Holy Synod and the upper ranks of the Ecclesiarchy to the world of Ophelia VII. This planet had been the capital of his former diocese as a cardinal and was likely the third richest world in the Imperium after Terra and Mars. Separated from the schemes of the Administratum by this distance, the secular power of the Ecclesiarchy began to grow once more. It greatly expanded the fleets and armies of the Frateres Templar, and restarted its wars of faith against all those it designated heretics or enemies of the Emperor. Unsurprisingly, such heretics were also often obstacles to the further growth of the Imperial Church's own wealth and power. But the growing political divide in the Imperium also proved irresistible to its enemies. In the early 35th millennium, the agents of chaos succeeded in splitting the Imperium in two. The political divisions on Terra and the increasing demands of the Ministorum for new tithes strained the resources of many worlds across the Imperium. What began as a dispute over the terms of trade by a few planets with the Imperial government rapidly escalated into outright rebellion. The governing Council of the world of Nova Terra declared itself the rightful ruler of the Segmentum Pacificus, one of the Imperium's 5 major interstellar divisions which made up most of the galactic west. Through the existence of well-placed chaos cults in the region, the servants of the dark gods were able to exploit this instability to pursue their own agendas. The Dark Angels chapter of Space Marines was most concerned about this secession of the Segmentum, which was remembered as the Nova Terra Interregnum. The chapter's governing inner circle believed the uprising to have been the work of the fallen angels. These were the former Dark Angels who had garrisoned the lost chapter homeworld of Caliban during the Horus Heresy. Many of the fallen had turned to the service of chaos after Caliban's destruction and become true heretic Astartes. But others claimed to still be loyal, and that it was the Dark Angels Primarch Lionel Johnson who had been the true traitor to the Emperor. Many of these fallen were disgusted equally by both the Chaos Gods and the perversion of the Emperor's dreams for humanity after the end of the Horus Heresy. Some fallen became mercenaries or pirates, while others sought to secretly integrate back into human society. Regardless of what they believed about themselves, the Dark Angels chapter was dedicated to capturing and executing every single one of their fallen to erase the shame of their betrayal. Many in the inner circle believed that it was the fallen who had manipulated events to bring about the secession of Nova Terra. But other divisions swept across the Imperium during the Interregnum. The tech priests of the Forge world of Moirae turned their back on the traditional teachings of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Known as the Moirae Schism, the heretics believed that the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon contained hidden messages within its micro-fluctuations, and these were prophetic messages from the Omnissiah. The Moirae tech priests compiled these messages into their archives, and copies soon spread to many of the Mechanicus' other divisions across the galaxy. These teachings included predictions that the Mechanicus on Mars would be overthrown, and that the cult Mechanicus and the Ecclesiarchy would be fused into a single faith. These claims were treated as heresy by the Orthodox tech priests on Mars, and civil war soon broke out between the different factions. The Dark Angel's suspicions were soon realized. During the Interregnum, the Inner Circle directed their battle brothers to seek out Obadiah Hrakan, the tyrannical ruler of an upstart world and a key supporter of the Nova Terra rebellion. The Space Marines finally cornered Hrakan in the unmapped Veiled region of the Segmentum Pacificus, where he took refuge on a world that served as a pirate port. To ensure there was no escape, the Dark Angel's fleet blockaded the world. It then teleported the entire elite Deathwing company to the world's surface. These Terminators slaughtered all resistance, until only Hrakan remained, finally revealed as one of the fallen. He refused to surrender, but was finally subdued in a duel with the master of the Deathwing. His unconscious form was then transported back to the Rock, the Dark Angel's mobile fortress monastery, for interrogation and execution. The Moirae Schism was only ended by massive bloodshed between the different factions of the Mechanicus. While Moirae itself was destroyed after Mars deployed a massive fleet to scour the heretical Forge world of all life, the schism smoldered on for decades. Battles were fought between different Forge worlds, and the void was littered with the burning corpses of tens of thousands of Mechanicus starships. After the destruction of Moirae, the Orthodox forces of Mars were ultimately successful in culling the heretics from their ranks. But the ideas of the schism had infiltrated many Titan legions, and even some Space Marine chapters allied with the Mechanicus. The conflict would leave bad blood between the Forge worlds of the Imperium for many centuries. While the Space Marines and the Mechanicus sought to root out the causes of dissension across the Imperium, in the mid-35th millennium, a new reforming Ecclesiarch, Gregor XI, was elected. Gregor hoped to reinvigorate the Holy Synod, and to this end he announced that the Ministorum would return its headquarters to the Ecclesiarchal Palace on Terra. Gregor believed that the true center of the faith always had to be humanity's homeworld. Despite vocal opposition and the passage of 12 years, Gregor XI succeeded in reopening the ecclesiarchal palaces on Terra. However, the cost of the move and the refurbishment of the palaces took a heavy toll on the thinly stretched resources of the Ministorum, forcing the Ecclesiarchy to increase tithes even further. Gregor promised further radical reforms, but before he could put them into motion, he died in suspicious circumstances of food poisoning. Despite galaxy-wide expressions of grief, a more conservative ecclesiarch quickly succeeded him. It was this new, more confident Adeptus Ministorum which finally moved to end the Nova Terra Interregnum in the 975th year of the 35th millennium. The Ecclesiarchy sought to use the potent faith of the Imperium's people to reshape the Emperor's realm into a truly theocratic state governed by the Church. The Ministorum's religious propaganda stirred up a series of wars of faith against the rebel Council of Nova Terra, known as the Cataclysm of Souls, when the Council publicly rejected the Ecclesiarchy's teachings. Billions died in these brutal religious conflicts, as civil war engulfed the Imperium on a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy. The Dark Angels took advantage of the fighting to launch a daring assault on Nova Terra. They believed that the member of the Council known as the Savior of Praxis was actually the fallen angel Cypher, the most infamous and enigmatic of his kind. Despite their efforts, they failed to secure a prisoner, and the elusive traitor slipped through their fingers once more. The Cataclysm of Souls finally brought the Nova Terra Interregnum to a predictably destructive end, reuniting the Imperium for the first time in 900 standard years. This largest of the wars of faith also decisively re-established the Ecclesiarchy as the preeminent power of the Imperium of man. Seeking to limit the power of the state church once and for all, the Administratum sought a new champion. His name was Gog Van Dyer, and his mad rule would be remembered only as the Reign of Blood.